I don't usually dig into online culture here on the channel, despite all of the interesting and weird things that happen online. Plus, I think plenty of other people on YouTube are covering that stuff very well, so I tend to leave it alone. But what I can talk about is some of my own online habits and how they've changed, especially when it comes to YouTube viewing habits. For some reason, I've recently wanted to travel back through some of the YouTube sub-communities that I have stumbled into in the past. I think a lot of people have gone through a similar experience where, through a combination of personal interest and mysterious algorithmic calculations, you suddenly find yourself engrossed in a subject that you've never really looked into before. You start finding, or rather you start being shown, other channels within that community. Maybe you get involved in the subject yourself, or maybe you spend a few weeks or months there and just sort of drift away, back to your more consistent online communities. I don't know whether anyone else will agree with me on this, but I think that this process is kind of fascinating, and I will be exploring it via some of my own experiences. Today, the rabbit hole in question is the YouTube synth and music gear community. I'll be talking about how and why I got into it in the first place, then mention some of the channels that I watched the most during this time. I'll talk about how being involved in this community affected me in my regular day-to-day life, and then finally I will get into why I eventually moved away from the community. Also, if you're not familiar with this section, this little corner of YouTube, you could also see this as a quick cursory tour from someone kind of on the fringes. So yeah, let's just do it. So the very start of this adventure was a real-life hobby of mine, which was just making music. I've played instruments since I was a kid, but it wasn't until much later that I actually started trying to write and record music. I just thought it would be fun, and it is sometimes. So there was this one time back in college where I walked into a guitar center with a friend of mine, and I had some rare disposable income in my pocket, and apparently I was just hoping to get back into music via consumerism. At the end of our session there, my friend walked away with a Korg Volca keys, which is this thing here, and I picked up a Teenage Engineering PO14 pocket operator. So this was slightly before the pocket operator series really caught on, but basically each one is a small electronic instrument with a 16-step sequencer and built-in effects. And despite not knowing at all how to use this thing, or even really what it was, I was enamored. And as we'll soon get into, once you've gotten a taste of this world, it can be tough to resist the charms of really visually appealing gear. And Teenage Engineering, a Swedish design group, knows exactly how to tempt your impulsive consumerist tendencies. Just look at this thing, really. It's very simple. It's just a PCB with a liquid crystal display, 2 potentiometers, and a bunch of buttons on it. But it also has this wonderful techno-industrial look, and every pocket operator features fun little animations that respond to what the instrument is doing, and they seem heavily influenced stylistically by the old Nintendo Game & Watch systems, especially since the pocket operators can also function as clocks and alarms if you really want that. But this was really just a shallow toe dip. What actually got me into the synth gear YouTube scene was a video from a Czech company called Bastl Instruments. It was a video for the Bastl Castle, which is a tiny modular synthesizer. The device itself was compelling, and the video's presentation style was just great. It gave the impression that this was just a few fellas making weird stuff, and I still think that's pretty accurate. I also saw the Castle as a relatively inexpensive gateway into the world of synthesizers. Just for some perspective, I think it's about time for a brief and hazy rundown of the contemporary synthesizer landscape. This is going to take a little while. If you feel like skipping it, go ahead. I'll try to put chapters in the thing. So, I'm not an expert. Please forgive any minor inaccuracies. But more or less, synthesizers in some form have been around for decades, with some of the originators, like Moog, staying in the game to this day. So you've got hardware and software synthesizers. Hardware is hardware, it's a physical object, and software synths are, of course, designed to work with software. Software synths can be wonderful, but I personally don't tend to see them marketed nearly as much as hardware synths these days, and personally I enjoy hardware synths a lot more, and I usually have an easier time learning them in comparison with software synths. Also, on the marketing side, there's a benefit to the hardware because you can make the synth or Eurorack module look really beautiful or hip or kind of confusing, and then you can send out complimentary units to influencers who almost always seem to make generally favorable reviews and demos. For the purposes of this discussion, there are two types of hardware synths, standalone and modular. It's more complicated, but I'm really trying to move this along. So standalone synths work on their own. They generate sound, most likely a variety of different sounds, and they have lots of options for modulation and parameter tweaking, and they usually have their own built-in keyboards. As such, many standalone synths are attractive in their relative simplicity and ease of use. These are probably what most people picture when they think of synthesizers. The other hardware type is modular synthesizers, and it's a lot, but basically the customer builds their own system piecemeal by purchasing individual modules. Generally speaking, each module has a specific job, and then the modules can kind of interact with and talk to each other through different types of signals, usually by connecting patch cables in different ways. And even for a basic modular synth system, you're gonna need to saddle up and spend some... Just as an exercise, let's compare a basic standalone synth with a rough equivalent in modular form. This is the Arturia Micro Freak. It costs about $350 new, roughly $300 for a used unit. It doesn't have a normal keyboard, just a touch interface thing, but you can control it. It generates sound. It has an arpeggiator, a sequencer, an envelope, a cycling envelope, an analog filter, and CV gate out ports. Those are the big features. We're going to try to build a roughly equivalent modular system using this online tool that lets you drag in modules, see if they work together, and get kind of price estimates and stuff like that. Okay, so here we are in Modular Grid. What I'm going to start out with is an oscillator. We need an oscillator to produce sound. We probably won't be able to find the exact type that the Micro Freak uses, but just for a rough idea, let's find it here. Okay, so I went with the Erica Synth's Black VCO. That means voltage controlled oscillator, somewhat standard oscillator, but Erica Synth does some good work. It's relatively small, but as you can see down here already, we are almost at the price of the Micro Freak, and this is all we have. And just to be clear, you probably wouldn't have direct audio output from this. You would probably have to have something else producing voltage of some kind to send to this to actually trigger it and control it. Even if we didn't consider all the other stuff that we would want to put into this system, just for that oscillator alone to work, you also need a powered case. So I found a pretty cheap one here. This is a refurbished model here, but about 150 bucks. But there you go, you will at least have power for your modules. We could add all the other components that you would find in a Micro Freak, but I think the point has been made. The price comparison is nowhere near. It's absolutely nowhere near. Sure, with Eurorack you get the customization. You can make it whatever you want. You can make it serve your specific needs. You're getting some really high quality boutique modules, but good lord, does it get expensive extremely quickly. So, bringing this back around to a slightly younger me looking to get into synths and watching all these YouTube videos on the topic, spending $80 on a Bastl Castle seemed like a pretty gentle entry point for me. My little love affair with Bastl was definitely the first major step on this journey, but I soon had this routine circulation around several channels in the space, which I'll name off in just a minute. During this time, I also learned that gear channels featured effects pedals as well, which, though they're most commonly used with guitars and most commonly marketed to guitar players, we can easily put just about any kind of sound through a pedal. Also, they're called pedals because they're often operated by foot switches. You can also have them anywhere else. And in recent years, there's been some real crossover between pedals and synths, including pedals that are essentially synthesizers that are just triggered by external input. And there's even a pedal that emulates the modular synth experience and those connection options. All of this stuff felt exciting to me, and I really enjoyed following certain channels to get my fix, especially when I couldn't actually afford to buy new gear and try it out for myself. There really is a ton you can do with all this hardware, and many of the channels in this area have made that abundantly clear via videos, sponsorships, and raw creativity. Alright, yeah, so these are the channels that I was into the absolute most. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are the big names. These are sort of the headline players. That's not a phrase. So I initially got into the videos that Bastl made and posted themselves, which quickly led me to Cuckoo's sort of low-budget run-and-gun documentary about Bastl that he shot during a visit. So Cuckoo is a European musician and YouTuber. I think he's from Norway, but it was hard to research, and I kind of get lost in those accents. He posts tutorial videos, he posts jams, seems like a nice enough guy, and his Bastl documentary kind of kicked the door open for me, not just in terms of his work or Bastl's work, but the contemporary synth community in general. On top of all the weird instruments that I was seeing for the first time, I was intrigued by the idea of a company that seemed as equally concerned with its products as its employees' well-being and creativity. And at least when the documentary was recorded, Bastl regularly hosted concerts and guest talks, and the head guy, Václav, seems very intelligent and, in a way, maybe a bit of a kindred spirit.
So there is no undo in the real life, and I kind of like the idea that when you're making music, it's kind of the same thing, you know, because for me, like, making music doesn't get easier. Like, the more I make music, it does never get easier. The same is with my life. The older I get, it just never gets easier. It's like always surprising, always complicated, and always like really, really hard.
Václav also introduced me to the concept of converting almost anything into sound, or the other way around. There are some incredibly interesting ways to make all kinds of stuff compatible with audio equipment, especially modular gear. And I'll say right now that one of the legitimately helpful long-term takeaways from my time cruising through this community has been the exposure to different perspectives on the creation of music and sound, much more so than any recommendations for specific instruments or software. From that point on, YouTube did its usual thing, and I was quickly exposed to many more channels within this community. Here are just some of my favorites. Hainbach is a German guy who specializes in ambient music and the use of tape and test equipment. He's definitely another person who likes to integrate non-traditional sound sources into his work, often orbiting around Bauhaus and music concrete. He also recently did this piece on forgotten synths of the Marca region in Italy that's definitely worth checking out. Also, if you like the idea of destructive tape loops, the kind of thing that was used in William Basinski's one famous album, Hainbach has done some wonderful work in that area too. He's also good at doing pieces on historic electronic music equipment in general. Red Means Recording is probably one of the more well-known YouTubers in this sphere, and several of his early videos that featured song creation on the Teenage Engineering OP1 went viral. It's also worth noting that the premise and presentation of these videos were straight up stolen by at least one other channel that ended up doing pretty memey, low-quality work in comparison. But anyway, Red Means Recording has since expanded into some really interesting areas, including some collaborations, modular guides, and reviews, just sort of discussion videos. It's really cool stuff. Also, his pocket operator video is just pitch perfect, and I watch it frequently. I also included a clip from it in another video, but I forget which video that was. So we're just going to move on. Ricky Tinez is a staple of this community. He seems to be more influenced by like dance music and beats than the other creators I've mentioned for the most part. Tinez's work is cool and his videos are very calming and cozy. Good stuff. Dallas Jammin' is what this one channel used to be called. Now it's just called JAde Wii, after the creator. Yeah, the channel is a great resource for people just getting into synths and for people who want to jam and perform without software. It's not the biggest channel in the space, but definitely valuable for sure. And the videos have a unique personal feel to them. Earthquaker Devices is a company based out of Ohio that makes effects pedals, typically marketed to guitar players, but ultimately we're talking about 1/4-inch jacks here, so you can run almost anything through these. I'm not a big fan of all their videos, and a lot of it is just plain marketing, of course, but they do have a pretty great series called Show Us Your Junk, where musicians and composers talk about the gear that they have accumulated over time. Noir Et Blanc Vie does some elaborate reviews, sometimes bordering on comedy videos, and I've especially enjoyed his follow-up review of The Micro Freak. But probably my favorite gear/synth channel is Knobs, and good God on a cast iron plate, this is some fine work. This is some really good work here. For a long time, the channel was basically just demos of effects pedals. Typically, with an instrument or pedal demo online, you get some guy, it's almost always a guy, who's capturing some kind of video footage of the device, maybe on their phone, and they talk and talk a bunch before getting to any sound, and the sound is usually recorded with the camera's onboard mic, which only gives you a very rough ballpark of what it would actually sound like in real life. I'm not trying to knock DIY demo videos, but I really need to set up why Knobs' videos were so goddamn refreshing. I'm gonna gush for a little while, so just strap in, but that's what we're here to do. The classic Knobs video has a pretty consistent structure. You generally get a dry signal over the pedal's packaging, almost always with this signature melody or riff, I guess we could call it. Then we get the wet signal with the pedal on display. The subsequent visuals usually include objects that fit the color palette of the pedal, along with kinetic typography, and even there, the writing is actually really good. It's probably not to everyone's taste, but these videos explain the key functions of each device while also giving a more ethereal taste of how they sound and what they can offer, which I think makes a lot of sense for a medium as non-conceptual as music. And the videos do all of this while also being artful and subtle. Eventually, the fella behind Knobs started doing voiceover for his videos.
So we have some stuff on the table now. Help you feel comfortable. We have a nice sock there.
Specifically for what is more or less a full documentary about the process of creating an effects pedal in collaboration with Chase Bliss, and I loved seeing that the style and tone of his previous videos extended seamlessly into live action documentary footage. The resulting pedal, by the way, a blooper, looks fantastic, but I'm not gonna try it. I can't spend $500 on a pedal. I just can't do that now or maybe ever. But hey, impressive. Knobs' videos, they just feel like the first solid spring breeze that finds its way through a drafty window, and you immediately get a whiff, and you're like, oh yeah, this is okay. Things are generally okay. And I think pulling that off is pretty impressive, especially considering how these videos cover a pretty wide range of devices and also just a decent variety of discussion topics. Even his video on the extremely abrasive industrial electric 4046M, which is still one of my favorite videos, feels relaxing and airy somehow. And at the time of writing, some of the most recent Knobs videos have been these fairly expansive roundups in which the music and sounds being created are really something special. But I think that's enough fawning. Now I'd like to talk about how my immersion in this community actually affected me. It's hard to get around the fact that many of the videos produced by creators in this community function as marketing, even when they're not necessarily intended to. And this is a tricky subject. There are, of course, outright sponsorships on a lot of these channels that are extremely common in this space. It's all over the place. And that just means that either the creator gets paid to talk about a specific product, or they receive a free or discounted device, which they can then feature in videos.
Fine Gear endorsed me with this to use it in my music, but I found it so bold and beautiful that I thought I would make a review video.
Hologram sent over the microcosm looper slash... oh man, I probably should have read the little tagline for this. So Steve Bragg, the owner and designer at Empress Effects, hit me up and offered to send me this to check out. And the reason I'm saying this is because I just want to be as transparent as possible. That no, a video was not part of the deal to check this thing out, and Steve even offered to pay shipping back.
ADEX Systems sent me the VC Looper to demo, as well as some other modules, and I'm so happy that they did.
What's up guys, my name is JAde Wii, and today we have something very special in the studio, and it is the Roland SP404 MK2. And I'm so excited to be a part of this release.
Now, full disclosure, before I talk about value, Moog was kind enough to send over this review unit.
I don't have that big of a problem with sponsorships in general. They are not inherently awful, and especially here, like, these aren't massive companies, you know, trying to add, it's not VPN stuff. It's generally small companies that make boutique hardware, software, and trying to sell it to people in the musical community. That's fine. But at the same time, when you consider what starts to feel like market saturation in synths and effects, and just how often new devices are released and showcased by a lot of these channels, it can start to feel like you're basically just watching commercials, even when the videos are really well done and don't hit you over the head with a recommendation. Even non-sponsored videos can sometimes feel that way if it really focuses on a specific item or product. Then there are the videos that feature really weird products and instruments, including many that aren't currently in production. But even these can sometimes send you to eBay anyway, hoping to find some kind of quality audio gear for a humane price. And there's even a specific concern in this community about the ethics, should we call it the ethics, of talking up like a really great piece of gear that was previously very cheap, because once the word gets out, there will probably be a surge in demand as a direct result, which will most likely cause the secondhand price of that equipment to rise slightly or completely skyrocket and maybe stay there for a long time.
I'm sort of reluctant to share with you a secret weapon, which is the Shure field recorder, the FP42. Yeah, you don't need to blur it out. It's a secret weapon, but there's a lot of them out there. There's one for everyone who wants one.
And I'll tell you my new true love, or maybe I shouldn't, because then the price will go up. The yeah, those are tight.
On the consumer side, there's a significant temptation to buy stuff. I've even heard the term gear acquisition syndrome used on one of the related forums, and it just describes the cycle of buying gear and then seeing more gear and immediately wanting to buy more gear again. It's a real thing. I don't know whether it's more prevalent in professionals or amateur musicians. Maybe it's more or less the same across the board. It's a real thing, and it has definitely been real for me. So when I was so very deep in this rabbit hole, I purchased an almost embarrassing amount of gear as a direct or indirect result of watching these kinds of videos. And I ended up selling off the vast majority of this gear when I needed to, just get more money, pay some bills, make rent, stuff like that. Thankfully, a lot of quality audio equipment holds its value very well, or even it increases in value, making many of these purchases relatively low risk. But basically, I was trying to figure out what kind of music I wanted to make at the time. And I was doing this by just going through one product after the other. I convinced myself that if I just had that one thing I was infatuated with at the moment, I would be able to do exactly what I wanted. And by the way, I don't think this is a great mindset to be in when you're trying to make music. Sometimes it's true, but really not that often. I tend to find it more creatively satisfying to find inventive ways to use what I already have. Anyway, I have an exact record of all the gear I bought, and sometimes sold off again, during this stretch of time, because I did almost all of this buying and selling on Reverb, which is actually a pretty good marketplace for music gear. And by the way, I'll have you know that I'm holding down a really solid 5-star rating on there, so just saying. Here we go. This is the list. We're gonna get to it. I bought a Rowan Time Maker multi-delay, which is like a cheap Chinese delay pedal, and I still have it because I don't think that it would sell for very much, but it's all right. It's many different types of delays. They sound okay. Bought a custom with a K MOSFET bass amp from the 80s. This thing's kind of a monster, but the hiss is really bad. And while we're on amps, there was a time where at a Goodwill in Burbank, I found this custom PA40 125 watt amplifier mixer deal. It's for a PA system, I assume, but regardless, yeah, it's a lot to deal with, and it doesn't even have the ground post on the plug, which means that it's also potentially dangerous to use, so I don't use it that much. I've done some real nonsense with this, including some no input feedback manipulation stuff, and while I was doing that, it blew out 2 separate pairs of headphones, completely destroyed the speakers. I also think it's really neat to look at. It's a very nice look, in my opinion. During quarantine, I bought an Alesis Turbo electronic drum kit, which is a really cheap drum kit, but I hated the sounds on it. The reverb was built in and awful, and you couldn't get rid of it. So I bought the brain, like the central unit, from an Alesis Nitro kit, which is like the next step up. Hooked that up. I still have that kit, but I sold off the Turbo brain at some point. I would love to be able to upload my own drum samples to this, but units capable of that are very expensive. So if you have any advice there, please let me know. I just want to throw all kinds of sounds in there. Got a Stone Deaf Fig Fum, which is sort of a Big Muff clone evolution thing, which I still have, and I'll keep it forever because I don't play guitar without it. Got a bass guitar from someone here in town. I think it was in Long Beach. I took the paint off mostly. It's also left-handed, so not really ideal for me. I have an Empress Zoya, which is just magical and wonderful. It does multi-effects. It does modular stuff too. I tend to do the multi-effects, and it's just a creative blank slate. I love it so much. I hope I can keep it forever. I'll probably be using it to make all kinds of sounds that I'll put in this video. Oh gosh, what else? This was another quarantine thing, but I dove into a guitar project where I bought this K brand guitar husk from the mid-60s, and then I gathered up all the parts that I needed, or I thought I did, and that was tough because K is long gone, and then the company that kind of took up the reins, which was a Japanese company called Taisco, they're also gone, so just finding period-accurate parts, they're really scarce and expensive. I did the wiring myself because it's very easy. I cut this pick guard to fit with a Dremel, and it doesn't really fit at all. I also messed up the bridge, had to move it later for intonation. I put this Recreation bridge and tailpiece on, which I aged with some chemicals that now I have too much of. The strings are crooked coming down the neck. Pickups are crooked and really janky. I thought I could surface mount them. Didn't work out at all. The action on it is just completely it's basically unplayable past the 12th fret. But the Kent Armstrong pickups here are lovely, and they're the first humbuckers I've ever owned. Love them. Oh yeah, and this one here should be flipped the other way around. And I haven't sold this off because I like it, and I also don't think that it would sell at all. I don't know who would buy this. Do you want like a sort of partially non-functioning guitar? Before that project, I bought a Taylor Academy 12 acoustic guitar. The Taylor is excellent, and that's not going away. I love having it. It just sounds, oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I lost my other acoustic guitar. I don't know where it went. It's gone, so I have this one now. But that's about the end of the list. Somewhat recently, I bought an original Novation circuit, as well as a Novation Launchpad Mini to use with a Monome Norns Shield version, which I also bought recently, and which I assembled on a stream that one time. Kind of forgot about that. And while we're here, I thought I'd give my very own studio tour. So a lot of these gear tubers, you know, they show off their super cool studios with all this great gear and nice lighting and hardwood floors probably, and I think it's time to share my setup. Hey everybody, so this is my studio. Very premium, very exclusive kind of stuff. I don't have studio monitors, but I have speakers. These guys kind of look like monitors. So all I have to do is just take them out of the TV and I get them hooked up over there. Alright, so this is just under the desk here. Oh, hold on, it's not quite long enough. Now I get that plugged in. Okay. And just like that, it's just that easy. Got some plants. That one over there is dying. That keyboard there is very hard to get out of the corner of the room like that. Got some cables. That's my cable organization area. So this is a premium Behringer Euphoria. I couldn't make that joke. I couldn't keep a straight face. So thanks for joining me, checking out the studio and everything. We'll see you next week when we demo a $10,000 synth that I bought for tax reasons. Goodbye. Remember to like us. But beyond just listing off the stuff that I was buying at the time and what I got into, the channels that I got into, I think that one of the important questions to ask is how much music did I actually make during this time? Probably not as much as you would think. I have released a couple of short albums. This one here was very early on, a little bit embarrassing. There was another one with just acoustic guitar and vocals. I deleted that one. This one was made almost exclusively with the OP1 when I still had it. I recently released some dance music that was created exclusively with stock sounds from the Novation Launchpad app, and then I added some effects from the Zoya. And a while back, I found a guy called Laser Mom on the Free Music Archive, back when that was still like a really vibrant website with people uploading weird stuff. And he had this 7-minute long song about Three's Company, or like the guy from Three's Company. I thought it was fantastic, so I reached out to him, and we ended up working together on some weird music. We released an album last year called Last Lap, and I like it a lot. Laser Mom's great. Excellent sense of humor, creativity, influence from some 90s goofball stuff like Ween and all this. It's great, and I'm still in touch. We're trying to work on more stuff. And anyway, I'm almost always recording little bits of something just to try it out, but since I'm not very organized, I just forget about a lot of stuff, or I lose it when I'm shuffling files around. In fact, let's go ahead and have a bit of a listening party, I guess. I'm just gonna go through some of the old files here, and I'll just see what we get. Okay. Oh no. It's kind of nice with the delay. I like that. Okay, so this just ramps up then. I think we just lose it all in the delay. Eventually. Did you want to say something? Huh? Yeah, I need to do more with, I don't know, I want everything to just be glitch stuff these days. So even at the height of my involvement with the GearTube community, making music pretty much just stayed a hobby for me. This community helped me learn a lot more about music and music gear, and I don't regret buying and trying out all of that gear that I just mentioned. I learned what I like and what I don't really like. I learned what's helpful to me and what's not, especially as someone who doesn't play keyboards. That can be very limiting in this space. So much of this was just exploration for me, and from what I can tell, it's similar for plenty of other people as well. You find out your own preferences and tastes, and it can be satisfying to follow your gut when you're working with something, rather than trying to apply some specific intention to each instrument. This community encouraged me, indirectly of course. I don't know any of the creators I've talked about here, but I often felt inspired and excited about coming up with new ideas and trying new instruments. And I guess it goes without saying that these channels and many others turned me on to some great music and even entire genres that I hadn't really looked into before. But of course, as with any rabbit hole, there comes a time when you need to head back to the surface. I've come back around to a few of these channels in recent months, but only after a very long break. I still make music, and I enjoy seeing great work come out of this community, but I did get tired of it after a while. To try and guess why it tired me out, I'm going to make some potentially unfair generalizations about the community based on my personal experiences with it. For one, it's definitely not the most diverse online community, let's say. It's possible that the algorithm just isn't recommending some great channels from women and people of color, or maybe there just aren't many women or people of color making these kinds of videos about this kinds of gear. But whatever the reason, the vast majority of videos in this category come from white men in their 30s or 40s, possibly from Europe, or from companies made up mostly of white men in their 30s or 40s, possibly from Europe. I have noticed more women in the modular scene in general, but it's not like I'm getting substantial sample sizes here either, so just what I've seen. I also think that after spending some time in this community, I just felt exhausted when I was introduced to yet another analog synth, yet another reverb pedal, yet another wacky instrument with a debatable level of practical utility. Although I stopped caring about new gear entirely after a certain point, I just couldn't watch much of this stuff without constantly coming across more and more things to buy. I guess it started to feel limited, which was miles away from that initial sensation of creativity and possibility. Obviously, I'm not trying to say this community isn't worth checking out or that others will share my experience, but I think it's worth noting that I just wasn't always in the mood for it. The members of this community, meaning beyond just creators, that I've interacted with have always been kind, with just a couple of exceptions, and many of these videos that I've mentioned here or shown clips from, they've been genuinely helpful, and overall, I appreciate that this community exists, even if it doesn't quite feel like home. And that's just part of the rabbit hole. Most trips are temporary stays. Is that it? I think we're done. Let's shut it down. Cool. All right. Thanks for stopping by.